This food was born from necessity and became one of the greatest culinary traditions in American history. Creole cooking, the food that developed in Louisiana among black families, enslaved people, free people of color, and the generations that came after them, is not what most people think it is when they hear the word Creole. It is not primarily the restaurant food of New Orleans, not the expensive dishes served in tourist district dining rooms. It is the food that kept families alive when alive was the only option. It is the food that made something extraordinary from almost nothing, that took the cuts nobody else wanted, the vegetables growing wild at the edge of the field, the rice and the beans that were cheap and filling and could feed 8 people for the cost of $1, and turned them into a cuisine that chefs around the world now study. Every dish on this list was built from constraint. Every dish on this list is also genuinely delicious. That combination, necessity producing beauty, is the most honest story of Creole cooking, and it is the story that the families who made this food deserve to have told correctly. The first dish is red beans and rice, and it is first because it was the dish that anchored the week for more Louisiana black families than any other. Monday was wash day, the day when the household's laundry was done by hand, a physically exhausting process that left little time for cooking. Red beans could be put on the stove in the morning with whatever smoked pork was left from Sunday, a ham hock, a smoked sausage end, a piece of tasso, and left to cook slowly all day while the washing was done. By evening, when everyone was exhausted, the beans were ready and the rice had been cooked in 20 minutes. The technique is the foundation. You start with dried red kidney beans soaked overnight, drained, and covered fresh with water or stock. You add the smoked pork, whatever you have. You add onion, celery, and bell pepper, the holy trinity of Creole cooking, the aromatic base that appears in nearly every savory dish in this tradition, because these 3 vegetables are cheap, available year-round in Louisiana, and together produce a flavor depth that more expensive aromatics do not improve upon. You add garlic, bay leaves, thyme. You cook it low and slow, 3 to 4 hours, until the beans are completely soft and some of them have broken down into the liquid, and thicken it into something that is no longer soup, but not quite stew, something in between that Creole cooks called the gravy. You serve it over white rice cooked until each grain is separate, and you eat it with hot sauce on the side. This dish costs almost nothing. It feeds a large family. It tastes like something that took all day to make, because it did, and that time investment has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the understanding that patience is a form of cooking skill. The second dish is dirty rice, which despite its name is one of the most flavor-dense preparations in the entire tradition. Dirty rice gets its name from its appearance. Cooked white rice darkened by the chicken liver and gizzards cooked into it, producing a color that looks, honestly, like dirt and tastes nothing like what it looks like. The organ meats were the parts of the chicken that nobody with money wanted. They were cheap, sometimes free, always available. They are also among the most nutritionally dense foods available, high in iron, B vitamins, and the specific amino acid profile of organ meat that is distinctly richer than muscle meat. The preparation starts with the chicken livers and gizzards, finely chopped, cooked in a hot pan in a small amount of fat until browned. You add the holy trinity, onion, celery, bell pepper, and cook until soft. Ground pork or whatever ground meat is available goes in next. You season heavily with garlic, cayenne, black pepper, and a specific blend of herbs that each family's recipe carries differently. The cooked rice, already done separately, goes into the pan and is tossed through the meat and vegetable mixture until every grain is coated in the drippings and the seasoning. The result is a dish with a depth of flavor that its ingredients alone do not seem to justify, until you understand that the organ meats are carrying a flavor concentration that muscle meat cannot match. The third dish is smothered pork chops, and it represents one of the defining techniques of Creole home cooking, the smothering method. Smothering is the process of searing protein in a pan, then cooking it low and slow in a covered pan with aromatics and a small amount of liquid until the protein is completely tender and the cooking liquid has reduced into a thick, rich gravy. It is the technique that made tough, cheap cuts of meat into something worth looking forward to at dinner. The pork chops used for this dish were not the center-cut loin chops of a well-provisioned kitchen. They were the shoulder chops, the blade chops, the thin-cut chops that were cheaper because they were less tender, more connected to bone and fat, and the specific worked musculature of the animal's shoulder. Season them with salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and cayenne. Dredge in flour. Sear in a hot cast iron pan in a small amount of fat. Lard was traditional, bacon drippings were common. Whatever cooking fat was available was used, until deeply browned on both sides. Remove the chops, cook the Holy Trinity in the same pan in the remaining fat, scraping up the brown bits from the bottom, which carry concentrated flavor. Add a small amount of water or stock to the pan. Return the chops, cover, reduce the heat, and let everything cook together for 45 minutes to an hour. The collagen in the shoulder chops melts into the cooking liquid and thickens it into a gravy without any additional thickening agent. The chops become tender enough to cut with a fork. The whole thing is served over rice, which in Creole cooking is not a side, but the vehicle, the thing that catches the gravy and makes a complete meal of what would otherwise be a small portion of protein. The fourth dish is court bouillon, pronounced haubillon in Louisiana despite what French phonetics would suggest, which is a fish stew that is one of the signature dishes of rural Creole cooking. Freshwater fish, catfish most commonly, but also buffalo fish, drum, or whatever was caught in the bayou or the river that day, cooked in a deeply seasoned tomato-based broth with a Holy Trinity, garlic, and whatever spices were available. The fish itself was free if you had the patience to catch it, which in a Louisiana with extensive bayou and river access required only a cane pole and time. The tomatoes might be fresh in summer or canned in winter. The seasoning was aggressive because aggressive seasoning disguised the sometimes muddy flavor of freshwater fish taken from slow bayous, and because the Creole palate developed in a culinary tradition that understood flavor as something to be built, layered, and intensified rather than something to be muted. The technique for court bouillon starts with a roux, the cooked mixture of flour and fat that is the foundation of much of Creole cooking. Cooked to a medium dark color, darker than blonde and lighter than chocolate, the specific brown that gives the dish its body without the bitterness of an overcooked roux. The Holy Trinity goes into the roux and cooks until soft. Tomatoes go in, fresh or canned, with enough liquid to create a broth. Season heavily. The fish goes in last, added in large pieces, and cooked gently, just until done, which for most freshwater fish is between 10 and 15 minutes. It is served over rice with French bread on the side, if French bread was available, which in Louisiana it generally was, because Louisiana had enough French influence in its commercial baking that good bread was not hard to find even for households with limited resources. The fifth dish is stuffed bell peppers, which appears in virtually every Creole household recipe collection and which represents the tradition's approach to making a small amount of protein feed a large number of people. The stuffing is a mixture of ground meat, beef, pork, or a combination, cooked with the Holy Trinity, garlic, seasoning, and cooked rice. The rice extending the meat so that the filling has bulk and substance without requiring a large quantity of meat. The peppers are halved or their tops are cut off, the seeds and membranes removed, and they are blanched briefly in boiling water to soften them before filling. The filling goes in, packed generously, and the stuffed peppers are baked until the peppers are completely tender and the filling is cooked through. The dish has a completeness to it. Protein, vegetable, starch, all in one self-contained unit. That made it practical for serving at tables where the number of people eating sometimes exceeded the number anyone had planned for. The sixth dish is okra gumbo, and it requires careful distinction from the many things that are called gumbo. There are two primary traditions of gumbo thickening in Louisiana. The file tradition, using dried and ground sassafras leaves as a thickener, and the okra tradition, using the natural viscous quality of cooked okra to give the gumbo its characteristic body. The okra tradition is older, more directly connected to West African cooking practice, and more commonly found in the home cooking of black families than the restaurant versions of the dish that became Louisiana's signature preparation. Okra gumbo starts with the same foundational elements as most Creole dishes: fat, the Holy Trinity, garlic, seasoning. But the okra, cut into rounds and cooked in the fat first before the liquid is added. Breaks down as it cooks and releases the polysaccharides that give the gumbo its thick, slightly viscous texture. This texture is the point. Gumbo is neither soup nor stew, but something specific to itself. A body achieved through the natural properties of the vegetable rather than through flour or any other added thickener. What goes into the gumbo beyond the okra varied by what was available. Chicken, sausage, shrimp if you were near the coast, crab if you had access to crab, whatever the day's resources provided. The gumbo was, in this sense, the perfect expression of Creole cooking's approach to constraint. You start with the technique, and the ingredients fill in whatever the day allows. The seventh dish is chicken and sausage jambalaya, which is the rice dish rather than the gumbo, and which demonstrates the Creole tradition's extraordinary capacity for cooking rice as a primary ingredient rather than a side. Jambalaya is rice cooked in a seasoned broth with protein and vegetables until the rice has absorbed all the liquid and taken on the color and flavor of everything it cooked with. The Creole version, distinguished from the Cajun version primarily by the inclusion of tomatoes, starts with browning the sausage, then the chicken, then cooking the holy trinity and garlic in the same pot in the drippings. Tomatoes go in, then stock, then the rice, then everything is stirred together, covered, and cooked until the rice is done and has absorbed the liquid. The result is a one-pot meal that requires one pan and produces enough food for a family at a cost that was accessible even in the leanest times. Every grain of rice is flavored. Every bite contains protein. Nothing is wasted. The eighth dish is red gravy over rice, which is not a named dish in the way that gumbo or jambalaya are named dishes, but which was in many households the most frequent weeknight dinner of all. Red gravy is the Creole term for a tomato-based sauce cooked with whatever protein was available. A small amount of ground meat, a piece of smoked sausage, a few chicken pieces, and seasoned until the tomato's acidity has been cooked out and the sauce is reduced to a thick, deeply flavored gravy that is served over white rice. It is the dish that required almost no deliberate planning because its ingredients were always present. Canned tomatoes or fresh tomatoes in season, some form of protein however small, the holy trinity, garlic, seasoning. It could be made in 45 minutes on a weeknight after a full day of work, and it tasted like it had been cooking all day because the reduction technique concentrates the flavors in a way that time on the stove produces. The ninth dish is fried catfish, which in Creole cooking is not a casual preparation, but a specific technique refined over generations of cooking a fish that required confident handling to be at its best. The catfish is cleaned, cut into pieces, seasoned with salt, pepper, cayenne, and garlic powder, then dredged in a mixture of cornmeal and flour. The cornmeal-flour combination produces a crust that is lighter than pure cornmeal alone and more crisp than pure flour alone. The specific texture that becomes the standard in Louisiana fish frying because it works better than the alternatives. The fish goes into hot oil, not warm oil, not oil that is getting there, but genuinely hot oil at a temperature that creates the immediate sizzle that seals the crust and prevents the fish from absorbing the oil. And it cooks for 3 to 4 minutes per side until the crust is deeply golden and the fish is cooked through. Served with hot sauce, with coleslaw, with bread, with whatever else was on the table. Fried catfish was a Friday meal in many households, connected to both the Catholic tradition of Meatless Friday observed by many Louisiana Creole families and the practical reality that fishing was one of the food sources least subject to money. The 10th dish is mac choux, the corn dish that is one of the most distinctly Louisiana preparations in the entire tradition. Fresh corn cut from the cob, the milky scraping of the cob included, which is not the shaved-off kernels, but the cob itself scraped after the kernels are cut to release the starch and liquid that the cob contains. Cooked in butter or fat with onion, bell pepper, and garlic until the corn has caramelized slightly and the starch from the cob scraping has thickened everything into a creamy preparation that is not cream-based at all. The technique of scraping the cob is the key, the thing that distinguishes mac choux from simply sautéed corn. And it is a technique that requires knowing to do it, which means it is a technique transmitted within families rather than found in cookbooks. Mac choux was a summer dish when corn was abundant and cheap, sometimes free if you had access to a garden. It could be extended with shrimp or crab when those were available, or served plain alongside smothered meat when they were not. The dish demonstrates something consistent across the entire Creole tradition. The technique is the knowledge, and the knowledge makes cheap ingredients produce results that expensive ingredients without the technique cannot match. The 11th dish is lima bean soup, which in many Louisiana households was simply called butter bean soup, using the southern name for the dried lima bean. Butter beans cooked with ham hock, onion, and garlic in a long, slow simmer until the beans are completely broken down into a thick, creamy soup that is filling enough to be dinner on its own with cornbread. The ham hock provides both the pork flavor that is essential to the soup's character and the collagen from the bone and joint tissue that gives the finished soup its body. A single ham hock, which costs very little and still costs very little at any grocery store that carries them, can flavor a large pot of soup. The beans themselves were among the cheapest dried legumes available. The entire pot of soup, enough for a family of 6 to eat generously, was within the budget of even the most constrained household. The 12th dish is crackling cornbread, which is not just cornbread, but cornbread made with cracklings, the rendered skin of pork, cooked until crisp and crackling, which are then stirred into the cornbread batter before baking. The cracklings add fat, flavor, and texture to what would otherwise be a plain cornbread, and they represent the tradition of using every part of the animal, of turning the rendering process into an ingredient rather than treating it as a byproduct. The cornbread baked in a cast iron skillet preheated in the oven until screaming hot, the batter poured into the hot skillet, and producing an immediate sizzle that creates the dark, crisp bottom crust that is considered the measure of a correctly made southern cornbread. The 13th dish is stewed chicken, which in the Creole tradition means something specific. A whole chicken or chicken pieces cooked in the smothering method until the meat is falling off the bone and the cooking liquid has reduced into a thick brown gravy that is served over rice. The chicken is seasoned and browned first, then the Holy Trinity cooked in the drippings, then everything returned to the pot with a small amount of water or stock and cooked covered over low heat for an hour or more. Old hens, laying hens past their productive period, were traditional for this dish because they were cheaper than young chickens, and the long cooking time that the stewing method used was actually better suited to older, tougher birds whose collagen content was higher. The longer cooking made them tender and produced a richer gravy than a young chicken would produce. The 14th dish is smothered cabbage, which demonstrates that the smothering technique was applied to vegetables as successfully as to meats. Cabbage cut into wedges or large chunks, cooked in a small amount of fat with onion and garlic, then covered and allowed to steam in its own moisture until completely tender and slightly caramelized at the edges where it contacts the pan. A piece of smoked pork, whatever was available, goes in with the cabbage and cooks alongside it, its smokiness penetrating the vegetable as everything softens together. Cabbage was one of the cheapest vegetables available year-round, and smothered cabbage over rice was a complete meal from the most inexpensive possible ingredients. The 15th dish is red beans and rice with pickled pork, which is a variation on the foundational dish that deserves its own entry because the pickled pork changes the character of the beans significantly. Pickled pork, shoulder meat, or but brined in a salt and vinegar solution for several days, adds a tangy, salty depth to the beans that plain smoked pork does not produce. The slight acidity from the pickling brine integrates into the bean cooking liquid and brightens the overall flavor, keeping the beans from tasting heavy despite their richness. Making pickled pork at home requires only pork, salt, vinegar, and a few days of patience, and it transforms an inexpensive cut of pork into something with the flavor intensity of a much more expensive ingredient. The 16th dish is okra and tomatoes, which is one of the simplest preparations in the tradition and one of the most misunderstood outside of it. Okra cooked with tomatoes loses much of its viscous quality because the acid in the tomatoes breaks down the polysaccharides that produce the sliminess that people unfamiliar with okra find off-putting. The result is a vegetable dish with a specific texture, the okra yielding but not slimy, the tomatoes broken down into a thick sauce that pairs with rice as naturally as any more elaborate dish. A small amount of smoked sausage or bacon goes in for flavor. The seasoning is simple: salt, pepper, garlic. The dish takes 30 minutes. It costs very little. It is a complete meal. The 17th dish is crawfish étouffée, which in its home cooking form is considerably simpler than the restaurant version and makes use of the fact that crawfish, the small freshwater crustaceans that are one of Louisiana's defining ingredients, were historically so abundant in the bayous and rivers of the state that they were free for the catching or very cheap to buy in bulk from commercial trappers. Étouffée means smothered in French, and the dish is exactly that: crawfish tails smothered in butter and the Holy Trinity, seasoned with cayenne and pepper, with a small amount of stock to create a sauce. Served over rice. The preparation is one of the quickest in this entire list, 30 minutes from start to finish, and it is one of the richest in flavor, because crawfish have a sweetness and a specific oceanic meets freshwater flavor that no other ingredient replicates. The 18th dish is chicken fricassee, the Creole adaptation of the French technique of braising chicken in a sauce made from its own cooking juices. Chicken pieces browned in fat, removed, the Holy Trinity cooked in the drippings, a dark roux made in the same pan, then the chicken returned with enough stock to cover. Everything cooked together until the chicken is tender and the roux has thickened the liquid into a rich brown gravy. The dish is technically related to its French predecessor, but tastes distinctly Creole, more aggressively seasoned, more deeply browned, more reliant on the roux for body rather than on the reduction technique that French fricassee uses. The 19th dish is pain perdu, which translates as lost bread, which is the Creole name for what English speakers call French toast. Stale French bread. French bread goes stale quickly, within a day of baking, and a loaf that could not be eaten fresh was not thrown away. Soaked in a mixture of egg, milk, and a small amount of sugar, then fried in butter until golden on both sides. The breakfast or dessert preparation that made use of something that would otherwise be wasted. In Louisiana, where French bread was made fresh daily in bakeries throughout the state, stale bread was always available, and pain perdu was a regular appearance on breakfast tables and as an after-school snack. The 20th dish is white beans and ham, which parallels the red beans Monday tradition but appears throughout the week as a different variation on the same economical logic. Large white navy beans or great northern beans cooked with ham hock, onion, and bay leaves until completely soft, the broth thickened by the breakdown of the beans themselves, served over rice. The difference in flavor between red beans and white beans is meaningful. White beans are milder, the broth lighter, and less sweet than the red bean gravy, and households that ate beans multiple times a week rotated between the two to prevent the meal from feeling repetitive. The 21st dish is Creole stuffed mirliton, which uses the pear-shaped vegetable that grows on a climbing vine and that is called mirliton in Louisiana, chayote in Latin America, and vegetable pear in other parts of the American South. The mirliton has a mild flavor and a texture that takes well to stuffing. Halved, the seed removed, the flesh scooped out and reserved, the shell used as a vessel. The scooped flesh is cooked with shrimp, ham, or whatever protein is available, with the Holy Trinity and seasoning, then stuffed back into the mirliton shell and baked. The technique is the same as the stuffed bell pepper technique, extending a small amount of protein with vegetable and starch to feed more people from less, but the mirliton itself has a buttery, slightly cucumber-like flavor when cooked that bell pepper does not provide. The 22nd dish is neck bones and rice, which is perhaps the plainest and the most honest dish on this list. Pork neck bones, the vertebral column of the pig, with the spinal cord removed, leaving bone, marrow, and the small amounts of meat clinging to the vertebrae, browned in a pan, then covered with water and cooked for 3 hours or more until the meat's separate from the bone and the collagen from the bone and the marrow has enriched the cooking liquid into a thick, unctuous broth, seasoned with the same herbs and spices that appear throughout the tradition. Served over rice, with the broth as the sauce. The dish is labor-intensive in time, but not in attention. It cooks itself, it just needs time, and it produces something deeply satisfying from the part of the animal that costs the least because it requires the most patience to eat. The 23rd dish is bread pudding, which in the Creole tradition is not a dessert in the luxurious sense, but a practical application of the same waste-nothing principle that produced pain perdu. Stale bread soaked in a custard mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, baked until set, served warm with a whiskey sauce made from butter, powdered sugar, and a small amount of bourbon. The dish uses ingredients that are cheap, stale bread, eggs, milk, and produces something that restaurant menus charge significant money for because the transformation that happens in the oven, the bread absorbing the custard and setting into a soft, rich pudding, is one of the more remarkable things baking does to simple ingredients. The 24th dish is shrimp Creole, which is the dish that most directly carries the word Creole in its name, and which is a straightforward demonstration of what the tradition does with abundant cheap protein and a tomato-based sauce. Gulf shrimp, which were historically so inexpensive along the Louisiana coast that they were sold for almost nothing off the boats. Cooked in a thick, deeply seasoned tomato sauce with the holy trinity, garlic, and cayenne. Served over rice. The shrimp cook quickly, 3 to 4 minutes in the sauce, and should not be overcooked because overcooked shrimp becomes rubbery in a way that perfectly cooked shrimp is not. The tomato sauce does the work of the dish, absorbing the shrimp's flavor as the shrimp cook, and the rice below catches everything. The 25th dish is rice and gravy, which is the simplest possible expression of everything this tradition stands for. Whatever meat is available, beef, pork, chicken, a combination, browned deeply in a pan, removed, the holy trinity cooked in the drippings, a small amount of water or stock added to deglaze the pan and capture the brown bits from the bottom. Then the meat returned, and everything cooked together until the liquid has reduced into a thick brown gravy and the meat is tender. Served over white rice. The dish has no fixed recipe because it has always been made from whatever was there, and whatever was there has always been enough because the technique makes it enough. This is the inheritance. 25 dishes, not one of them expensive, not one of them simple in any dismissive sense. Every one of them carrying a technique developed across generations of people who were given the worst of what was available and made the best food in America from it. The families who made this food understood something that no cooking school teaches explicitly. Constraint is not the enemy of creativity. Constraint is often its origin. When you cannot buy your way to flavor, you learn flavor. When you cannot afford to waste anything, you learn to use everything. When you feed the same people the same ingredients week after week on the same budget, you develop the technique that makes those ingredients different each time. The dishes on this list are not historical artifacts. They're still being made in Louisiana kitchens and in the kitchens of the diaspora that carried this food north and west and wherever Louisiana families went when they left. The recipes have variations in every household because they were never written down, they were taught by watching and doing, and the teaching produced slight differences that are the signature of a living tradition rather than a codified one. Make the red beans on Monday. Make the dirty rice on Tuesday. Make the smothered pork chops on Wednesday. Let the catfish fry on Friday. Feed the people in your house the food that kept people alive and became, against every expectation, one of the greatest cuisines in the world. It is not expensive. It never was. That was never the point. The point was to eat. The point was to be fed. The point was to sit down together at the end of the day and have something that tasted like somebody cared. That is what this food is. That is what it has always been.